This information should have anyone who preps concerned, because we know there's lots of dangers out there. We know that the threat of cyber attack exists, and we've been told that foreign aggression could escalate at any point in time. But according to those who would deter any threats to us here in the United States, the real threat is actually right here at home. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're talking about how we need to be concerned about the information that's being put out there about how the real threat that exists in the world right now to those of us who live in the United States of America is actually right here on our soil already. And that should concern you because there's some things in this report that was recently put out by the National Terrorism Advisory System on February 7th that had me a little bit alarmed, and it's why I want to share this information with you. And I do want to mention that this information was actually brought to me by somebody within my community who's part of the preparedness community as a whole. And I do appreciate when this type of need to know information is brought to my attention, because sometimes it's hard to keep track of every single thing that's going on out there, and I think that you all can agree with that as well. Now, basically, this bulletin that was put out summarizes the biggest threats of terrorism within the United States of America. And it is something that is put out yearly just to give everybody an idea of what the Department of Homeland Security thinks we should be on the lookout for. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the three main categories of threat that they were concerned about, and then I'm going to give you some notes as to what my concerns are with those categories and some of the information that was held within. Now, if I was to link this exact report to you in the description or in the pinned comment, it would make my video suddenly disappear, because basically it would be being put up against any mainstream media outlet that has more of a verifiable and valid idea about what the Department of Homeland Security is actually up to. So I'm not going to be able to put the link in the description, but if you search for this report, it will be very easy for you to find. And it is a bulletin that was put out by the National Terrorism Advisory System on February 7th, 2022. Hopefully that helps you out. Now, here is the summarization of the threats that the U.S. homeland includes right this second, okay? So number one is the proliferation of false or misleading narratives which sow discord or undermine public trust in U.S. government institutions. That was their biggest threat, okay? And we know everything that's going on in the world right now. We know what's happening with China, we know what's happening with Russia, we know what's going on in the sense of cyber attacks and everything else, right? This is number one, okay? So number two, continued calls for violence directed at U.S. critical infrastructure soft targets and mass gatherings, faith-based institutions such as churches, synagogues, and mosques, institutions of higher education, racial and religious minorities, government facilities and personnel including law enforcement and the military, the media, and perceived ideological opponents, okay? So basically the second biggest threat that they're concerned about in the sense of terrorism within the country is that this continued call for violence against all of the institutions that they just listed. And you can basically determine for yourself where these calls for violence are coming from, I'm sure. And then you go to number three, and it's calls by foreign terrorist organizations for attacks on the US based on recent events, which is the, I guess, the third biggest concern over or under the other two. So here's some things I want you to keep in mind. And this is all just out there for us to read, and it should concern you because a lot of this is gray area and there's no defined pattern as to exactly who it is that they're concerned about. But the things we really need to pay attention to is this whole idea of sowing discord or misinformation on the internet is going to be used at some point to make things very difficult for those of us who worry about certain events possibly occurring within our lifetime from being able to communicate or network or even put out the information if that time were to ever come. This is a big deal, okay? And honestly, the majority of this report was concerned about domestic threats. And that is something that you also have to keep in mind, because I don't think they were referring to a lot of the things that occurred during, I don't know, the summer of 2020. And it seemed like most of what they were concerned about was things that happened in like January of 2021 or something like that. So for the first section, the proliferation of false or misleading narratives and all that other stuff about online discord and mistrust in the government, right? They use the terminology of mis, dis, and malinformation around the election, as well as the crisis of 2020 as being the main derivative of that concern. Basically saying that those two things are what people are hyper focused on and bringing tons of different forms of information about, and it's causing people to move towards an extreme ideology in many ways and pushing them into a dangerous territory, okay? Number two, which is the continued calls for violence towards like critical infrastructure, soft targets, mass gatherings, all that stuff, right? They're actually concerned about the mandates being targeted in many ways because according to this report, and maybe you have some evidence of this yourself, or maybe that's something that maybe I just wasn't latched onto or missed during this time, but according to these reports, these mandates and everything else related to the crisis, right, of 2020, during that time, there was a lot of extremism against the mandates and often it became violent. So I guess that was a pretty big deal during that time, more so than anything else that was happening in 2020 related to anything that could be perceived as being violent. And the other thing that they were worried about is that there's going to be a justification of attacks on infrastructure because of the misinformation that's being spread about things related to like 5G, and that, you know, they should be concerned about the power grid and stuff like that because the people who are really worried about 5G are likely extremists who are going to do something in order to make sure that 5G can't be activated or whatever, okay? So, and when you read this report, which I'm hoping you will look up and find, and I hope you understand why I didn't link it in the description, right? But what I want you to understand is that you're gonna read through this and you're gonna see these things and you can start connecting the dots as to where the priorities are right now in the sense of defending the homeland versus everything else that's going on in the world, okay? And the third part, calls by foreign organizations to have attacks occur on US soil. All of that is related to online inspiration from foreign entities, saying that basically these foreign organizations are using the internet to inspire people to do copycat style attacks and stuff like that. And that still, even when they talk about these foreign organizations, still the whole concept around it is the idea that they're inspiring people who are here domestically to actually do these attacks. So it still turns into a domestic issue more than a foreign issue. It's just that, you know, foreign inspiration is coming from the internet, but the people that are going to do the bad thing are actually right here anyway. So everything they're concerned about is domestic. And everything they talk about is related to online misinformation and related to people sowing discord and related to, you know, people who instill healthy distrust in government institutions. And then, of course, using examples from the crisis of 2020 to say that, you know, the extremism surrounding some of those concepts is the biggest threat to the United States of America in the sense of terrorism as of this time. So you should be concerned. If you prep, you're a prepper and you're of a prepared mindset, and you take extra initiative to be ready for an emergency and be ready for any type of collapse or something of that nature, you should be concerned, because honestly, what a lot of this report is saying is that if you question the narratives and if you have any sort of an online presence where there might be any involvement with sowing discord or distrust or anything along those lines, that you are probably part of this problem. And that is a big deal, because when it comes to the way these organizations are approaching taking care of the citizenry of our own country, it often has a very, in order to save you, we may have to kill you kind of narrative behind it. That's how it feels anyway. That basically they're gonna save us from ourselves, because us going on the internet and disagreeing with things, or at least questioning things, and then wanting more information surrounding some of those ideas or concepts is actually creating an extremist domestic terrorism problem that is only getting worse to the point where it is the #1 threat to our country in the sense of terrorism as of right now. So I hope this conversation opened your eyes up to the territory that we are heading into. And I hope this conversation also got through to you without me having to spoon feed it. Because obviously we have to say things in certain ways here on this platform in order to get as much reach as possible. And I don't find myself or this channel or the preparedness community as a whole part of any of these extremist concepts or anything along those lines. However, I'm also not naive enough to believe that we wouldn't be listed as part of this problem. And I do believe that networking and community and helping each other during a disaster or an emergency of any kind is paramount to our success and our survival. And if any of these things keep progressing forward in the way that they are, and the government gets more and more involved with making sure that, this online discord is no longer a possibility for those who might have questions or arguments with the mainstream narrative, it hurts our ability to network and communicate and be a community as well. And these are things we should definitely be concerned about. If you don't think you're on a list, or at least popping up on the radar from time to time, this report should tell you probably otherwise. And I'm very aware of the fact that, I'm known, I would assume, but I don't do anything here that I think puts me on the level of being a concern. But I'm concerned because they're concerned about everybody. Well, actually, just Americans. And that's why I wanted to bring this information to you. It's something we have to keep an eye on and also watch out for. So if you have any questions for me at all, leave comments below, or go to magicprepper.com, and let's just see how this whole thing goes. Because according to the last couple of years, even with everything going on overseas, and even with all of the supply chain disruptions and the cyber attacks and every other thing that's being reported on in regards to foreign complications, let's just say, no big deal. The worst of the worst is still right here in the United States of America. And that's gonna be it for Magic Prep.